Well, hello. I think we're live, Jeff, which is great. Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar on AI in IT service support and meaningful metrics as well, where we'll be looking at and discussing the near future, what it could hold, what it may look like, and the promise of artificial intelligence and how that could reshape support services, the service desk, IT service management, and everything that we know. So my name is David Wright and I'm from Service Desk Institute. And we also have one of Service Desk Institute's very, very dear friends and strategic partner as well, Jeff Rumburg from Mttr. So it's great to be here today, Jeff.
Yeah, likewise, David. Great to see you. We've done a few of these events before, and I enjoy them. So
yeah, they're always good fun. They're always good fun. And I think certainly, you know, to do this in 2020, which has been an incredible year, you know, this conversation is incredible, yeah, unprecedented year of change, isn't it, really? The agendas have changed, I think. So digital transformation, intelligent automation, workload deflection, self-service, scalability, working from home. I think, you know, it's amazing to see all that in focus like never before as well. And I think sort of what I've been seeing over the last few years is how automation and AI has the potential to orchestrate and augment support services like a service desk. So how they become more autonomous, less reliant on human intervention, maybe other than to train and optimize an intelligent system, and systems managing the flows of stuff, you know, proactively rather than reactively, in sort of traditional brick sense scenario. And certainly what I be doing, and I know I'm going to talk a lot today, Jeff, so apologies, but I've been speaking to people in the field, you know, people talking to people, experts in the field, about whether or not this is a viable short or long-term proposition. What does it mean for skills when we look at the traditional approach to service improvement, and what does it mean for consumers, our end users, our customers? And certainly, what does it mean in a blended service as we orchestrate? What do we measure? What are the new metrics and measurements looking like? So it's been some year. Many are saying that it's a watershed moment for intelligent automation, for service orchestration, for artificial intelligence. Other people are saying it's just a blip and we'll return back to the norm. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss today. And I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions from our listeners, Jeff. And if you do have a question, listeners, please use the console to type them in, and we'll answer those as we go through the next hour or so. So Jeff, I mean, I've got a whole host of questions, and I don't know whether you want to respond to that, because I've got another set of stuff that I'll probably mention as well. But how do you respond to maybe what's happening this year so far?
Yeah, 2020 is a year like no other, David. And in IT service and support, everyone has had to improvise and come up with new ways of doing business. One of the most obvious is that most agents are now working from home as opposed to working from a home office. But I believe at the same time, David, we're at an inflection point when it comes to AI in IT service and support. Historically, a lot of what passed for AI was really just human intelligence. It was wrapped up to look like artificial intelligence. It was rules-based. Some of the better known bots simply read knowledge articles and then tell you what they've read. But the inflection point really happened in 2020, where for the first time I began to see demos of tools that actually did exhibit true machine learning. They got smarter over time. They automated key processes such as problem management and knowledge management. They reduced total cost of ownership. They shifted left. They improved first contact and first level resolution rates. And the holy grail of AI and IT service and support, they went all the way on the shift left diagram to level -2 support, seek and destroy, or search and destroy, which is seek out anomalies in the IT environment and eliminate them before they generate any tickets whatsoever. The industry has been talking about that and waiting for that for 25 years, and now we finally have real use cases of that. Yeah. Now, the pandemic and the fact that so many organizations are improvising and their agents are working from home, it's really accelerated the investigation into these AI tools, where IT managers are saying, listen, we can't go on this way. There's too much reactivity in IT service and support, and we need to find a way to build more proactivity, more prevention, take a broader strategic view of IT service and support, and increasingly AI is becoming part of the solution to that question. How do we become more preventive, proactive, and strategic? So I think the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of AI and organizations starting to take a serious look at how AI can augment their human resources and help organizations not just operate in a reactive paradigm, but become more strategic, more preventive, more proactive.
Yeah, it's interesting, really, and I'm a like yourself, a believer in mitigating, or at least believing in that you can mitigate human error better. Use things to mitigate. When I was in service, that was one of the biggest pains. If somebody asked me what was the biggest pain I'd like to fix, it was probably human error. Now, I'm not saying that AI is the fix to that, but I think certainly solutions and working systems, intelligent systems to try and support that, because they are good at not making mistakes if they're managed properly. And I think it is an interesting premise as well. It's an interesting time for support services generally. If you look, you mentioned it, if you look at the support service, the reactive nature, the proposition has always been reactive. So, if something's not working, give us a ring, we'll fix it. And I think that's becoming even more now over this last sort of year, an old way of looking at support models. It's an old way of looking at it. And it's been interesting to see as well how the industry narrative has changed during 2020. So from the adopting best practice, continual improvement, to narrative accelerated by COVID-19. So digital transformation, intelligent systems, recovery, sustainability, plasticity, which is a relatively new term being used by Gartner at the moment. It's not new, but relatively new in a sort of focus point. Intelligent automation, and the democratization of AI and proactive remediation. Again, Gartner as well. And I just want to go over some of that, maybe, because I'm really interested in this, Jeff. There's also a change in emphasis, I think, in the narrative around enterprise service management as well. The changes there. It means more now, I think, than it maybe did before. Self-sufficiency, shift left, self-service, and doing more with less, which has always been something we've spoken about less intelligently historically, I think, which is now come to the fore. And I was reading recently Gartner talking about 2021 and the intelligent composable business, which means decision making. Changing the focus on increasing autonomy and augmentation of decision-making as well. So that democratization of IT and decision-making as well. Also, technology platforms are changing that, the composition, which is about orchestration really, and the playoff, the handoff between human and non-human support structures as well. So it's very, very, very interesting indeed. And much of that, for me, the shift from reactive to proactive has always been something I've wanted to see. The seamless blending of human, machine, augmenting, all that stuff. And I think that's really important, because I think we'll go into this, Jeff, right? When we talk about user experience, when we talk about the speed to return to productivity, you talk about that all the time. And these are paramount things to consider, I think, when the organization, why it exists, and it's how it projects itself into the future as well, and what it means for an end user. So I'm hoping we'll maybe discuss all that, some questions as we move forward in this as well. And again, if we get any questions, I'll try and slot those in.
Yeah. So you brought up an interesting point around reactivity versus proactivity. And when I got started in this industry about 30 years ago, everything was reactive and everything was voice-based. A call would come in and somebody would have an issue, and typically the person who took the call didn't have troubleshooting capabilities, so they would write something down on a piece of paper and then send it through a vacuum tube system to somebody who was working in a data center who would then fix it. There still is way too much reactivity in this industry. And those organizations that are entirely reactive find their jobs quite frustrating, because to work in an entirely reactive environment where you simply respond to what comes at you in terms of incidents and service requests, it's frustrating. It's a chaotic environment. You tend to focus primarily on service levels and not on prevention. However, what we discovered is that you can be proactive. You're never going to be 100% proactive. The nature of this industry is that we can't predict when things are going to happen. We can't predict when major incidents are going to occur. There's an Erlang distribution, a probability distribution, that describes the rate at which incidents and service requests come into a level 1 service desk or a desktop support or field service organization. we're never going to conquer that Erlang distribution. However, there are preventive and proactive things that can be done. Yeah. And just kind of a rule of thumb, David, that works for me and that I've seen amongst the best performing IT service and support organizations is that they tend to be about 35-40% preventive and proactive, and then 60-65% reactive. So you never get away from reactivity 100%, but you can start moving the needle in the direction of being preventive and proactive. And that's one of the things that AI brings to the table in IT service management. It is by inherently a preventive tool, a strategic, a proactive tool to try and mitigate issues. That is anomaly detection, for example, before an anomaly becomes a ticket, detecting those ahead of time and providing alerts to IT so that they can take measures to eliminate incidents or service requests before they impact a large number of people. That's just one simple example of how AI is helping organizations move towards a more preventive, proactive, and strategic stance and get them out of this sort of reactive day-to-day vicious cycle that typifies so many IT service and support organizations.
And still does, I think, Jeff, and has done for a long time. So it is very interesting, and I've been speaking to experts in the field over the last few months, more than before, I think, because of the narrative shift and the change in what this means. I think the term AI, it's used, an awful lot. It's quite a great term for me as a not an expert, but as somebody who needs to understand it to be able to bring it into a service, right? It's quite a great term. In many cases, maybe used incorrectly, or even in some cases used in a misleading way, maybe. I really believe that having a clearer definition of what all this stuff really means and how to consider its potential once you've got that clarity in the service environment is really important. So, what about the definition of artificial intelligence, Jeff? How would you define artificial intelligence?
Yeah, when it comes to IT services support, David, I would define it as without human intervention. Does this tool reduce your ticket volume over time? Does it shift you left? And that's part of ticket volume reduction. If you shift left far enough, you go to level -1, which is problem management, eliminate tickets from their source. And then, as I mentioned earlier, for the first time, I've seen demos of level -2, seek and destroy, search and destroy. Yeah. So without human intervention, are we seeing reductions in ticket volumes? Are we seeing a decrease in total cost of ownership? TCO is simply the cost of support at every level in the organization. So it could be the amortized cost of your AI technology at level -2 and level -1. Could be the cost of your self-help portal plus your fully loaded cost at level 1, desktop support, field services, vendor support, and level 3 IT. That's total cost of ownership. Effective AI should reduce your total cost of ownership, should reduce your mean times to resolve. We've seen MTTR reductions as much as 60% through effective AI. Should improve your first contact and first level resolution rate and improve the customer experience. If it does all of those things and gets smarter over time, machine learning, that's a true AI tool. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of what passes for AI in this industry is really rules-based human intelligence. It's a bot, for example, a chat or a voice bot that reads a knowledge article and then tells you what it's read. That's not true AI, and it's certainly not machine learning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you look at the way that the industry, as commentators and as vendors as well, use the term, I think it's really important that people try and demystify what that really means. So I couldn't agree more, and I think you're right. Certainly, having some kind of reasoning agent, engine, whatever, the use of data, an intelligent way of learning is absolutely right, rather than a sort of a systematic, task-orientated flow. Which some people may say is AI, but really, in its truest sense, in the neural network sense. Well, it isn't. It isn't. I was speaking with not so long back with it, and I don't know if I think I've introduced you to Dan. I don't know if you've spoken to Dan Turchin. Dan is the founder of and CEO of PeopleRing, and he's an AI guy, right? And PeopleRing is a platform for HR and IT, and it's a really cool take on what a solution like that can mean. And he's got a really great take on AI, right? He terms it more as augmented intelligence. Now, I like that. So not artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence. Now, that to me, I think is a really good way of describing it. If you consider augmented reality, it's the blending of technology and the human. And it sort of makes more sense, I think, when you consider that blending or orchestration of service using AI as well. So how do you think then, right, that AI differs, or augmented artificial intelligence differs from human intelligence? What's the difference there? Maybe what are the two things good at, I suppose?
Yeah, well, human intelligence is based on experience and it's rules-based typically. So a lot of what passes for AI in this industry is rules-based type stuff. And it's an interesting case study. IBM, as you may know, in the early 1990s or late 1980s, developed a supercomputer called Deep Blue that they taught to play chess. And Deep Blue kept getting beaten by the world's best chess player, who in the 1990s was Garry Kasparov. And IBM finally came to the conclusion that the reason we can't beat Garry Kasparov is because we, as chess players at IBM, they got their best chess players at IBM and even hired some chess grandmasters to program this computer to play chess the way they did. That was human intelligence. And that's why Deep Blue kept losing to Garry Kasparov. Finally, they had an insight, and they said, you know what, we got to teach this computer to learn from its mistakes and to learn from itself over time, machine learning. And when they started doing that, that's when Deep Blue finally beat Garry Kasparov in its first chess match in 1996. Okay, by the same token, human intelligence is really just rules-based and experience-based. If this and that, and it can execute decisions very quickly. Experience-based, basically heuristics. But AI is not rules-based. AI is data-based. And it will typically take ITSM data out of your ITSM system, sometimes out of your CRM system. You have a separate knowledge system. It'll extract data from that. It'll take data from your remote tool, BombGuard, LogMeIn, for example, and it will look backwards at all the data, and it will find patterns. It will find cause and effect relationships, and it will develop knowledge that way. And then going forward, it will execute in real time anomaly detection. It will enable the prevention, level -2, level -1. It will enable the prevention. The best ticket is the ticket that never happens. The best AI tools automate problem, incident, and knowledge management. They reduce MTTRs fairly dramatically. They get tickets routed to the right person at the right place at the right time. A truly effective AI tool moves the needle on all the important dimensions, David. Better, faster, cheaper. You've heard me say that before. Better means, does the customer get a better experience? The answer is yes, because their MTTRs are faster and the first contact resolution rate is higher. Cheaper, yes, because it reduces total cost of ownership and it does displace some human labor. I'm not going to pretend that that doesn't happen. In fact, that's the primary motivation for a lot of organizations that adopt AI. Is reduction in human labor, because these are labor-intensive functions. 70% of your costs are tied up in human resources when you're talking about IT service and support. So better, faster, quicker MTTRs, and then lower cost. If you reduce your ticket volume, your total cost of ownership is going to go down. So effective AI does all of those things. Better, faster, cheaper, does it automatically without human intervention, and it gets better at it over time. So you're looking at process automation, you're looking at ticket prevention, you're looking at reductions in total cost of ownership, and you're looking at massive reductions in MTTR, which for a level 1 ticket, customers care most about first contact resolution rate. For ticket at field services, vendor support, level 3 IT, MTTR is a big driver of customer satisfaction. And effective AI reduces that dramatically, at least in part by eliminating ticket hops. If you can get a ticket to the right person at the right place at the right time, you can get a resolution much quicker. So in the industry, the average MTTR for a ticket that goes beyond level 1 is about 6 hours. Effective AI, we found in many cases, reduces that number to about 2 hours. So it can reduce MTTR by as much as 65% or 2/3.
That's considerable, isn't it? That's considerable. I tell you what, Jeff, let's have a quick look to see what our listeners have said, because, I think probably if you look at the session, you could probably do 3 separate sessions and some of the stuff that we've got from questions, right? So let's have a look now. I haven't got any names associated with these, so I'm just going to read what we've got out. One person is saying that we're speaking his language. Jeff's mentioned about the vendors that have shifted to -2, and asked if we can mention any vendors that he can research, or that this person can research. We may come on to that. I think we've got a question. We'll come on to that, and maybe we can talk about some of that a little bit later. So stay tuned for that. We've also got a point. Doesn't the use of AI, ML, from a predictive perspective, change the characteristics of incoming issues to the service desk? So trying to compare first contact resolution or resolution time to past performance is a poor comparison. It absolutely is a poor comparison, absolutely. E.g., fixing roving issues will typically result in more complex, more complicated issues being measured and reported. And you know what, that's a great point. I think that the whole premise of what continual improvement changes with the introduction of this kind of technology. You're absolutely right. I think the old way of looking at it, hindsight, rather than looking forward, is gone. It's there, but it's going. And I'd like to see it gone very, very quickly. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's more about the flow of a service rather than the fix, what we can fix and what's fixable. It's how we, as you mentioned, search and destroy, remediate, and what we can't remediate goes through a solution or an engine or an orchestration process with harnessing technology and data to learn how to do it. So we eradicate that. I think that's how, I see these things changing the premise of service, Jeff. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yeah. And I want to make a point on something you brought up earlier, David, was staff augmentation, or just augmented AI, if you will. And I think that's a good way of looking at it, because although AI will displace personnel over time, it's not going to happen overnight. And the reason organizations adopt AI is for the whole purpose of reducing your costs. And if 70% of your cost is human-based, of course, over time, that means that there's going to be a displacement of personnel. But MetricNet did a 2020 ITSM intelligence report, recently released this. And for the first time, David, what we're finding is that customer-facing IT service and support professionals no longer fear AI. In fact, they see it as a career opportunity. Yeah. So there's a really interesting analogy to the auto industry, for example. 30, 40, 50 years ago, your typical assembly line worker in an auto plant carried a wrench, wore coveralls, they were doing manual labor, they were putting tires on cars, they were helping guide, it was machine assisted, but they were helping guide drivetrains and engines into the car, that sort of thing. It was a very labor intensive process. Today, what you have are engineers behind safety glass that are looking at computers, and they are directing the robots that are building the cars. So the assembly is actually automated, and the assembly line workers are now engineers, quality control, quality assurance, mechanical engineers, and the like, that are looking at computer screens and directing those robots. By the same token, what I envision for the future of those who work in service and support, David, is that there's an unlimited path upward, but more will be demanded of you. Just like I believe that today's IT service and support professionals are some of the most qualified IT professionals in the industry. When you look at the bandwidth that they have to cover in terms of application support, infrastructure support, and the like, they are excited about what AI represents, because it means that it's going to automate away some of the easier things, at least initially. It's going to automate away the password resets. It's going to automate away some of the desktop support questions around Windows, Microsoft Office, and the like. And in my opinion, the future has never looked brighter for IT service and support professionals, because they now have a path forward in terms of providing expertise beyond what they've historically been able to provide. And their role in the future, they're going to be support engineers. That's what they're going to be called in the future. And their job is going to be to direct the bots, because the bots are not yet self-directing, or direct AI when anomalies are detected. So there's going to be some human involvement in AI for some time to come, in the sense that directing it, for example, if you see an emerging problem in a particular area, you can direct the bot to go out there and investigate that problem. You can have a bot, for example, when there's an MI, you can have the bot alert people about the MI and the expected resolution time. So the augmentation terminology that you use, David, I think is appropriate, because AI is not going to take over the world. It's not going to take over IT service and support, but over time it will displace some personnel. And for the most talented in this industry, that represents a great opportunity. It really represents a career path going forward, and it's going to catapult them into the status of what I would call service and support engineers with, all of the accoutrements, if you will, that come along with being an engineer in any industry. So I think the auto industry is a really interesting example, perhaps, past his prologue, an interesting example of what's likely to happen in IT service and support. But for the first time, massive computing power has made AI machine learning possible. And secondly, the big cultural change, which is that the frontline no longer fears AI, has led to this inflection point that I alluded to earlier. And we're starting to see rapid adoption of AI in IT service and support organizations all over the world. So we're at an inflection point.
Yeah, I agree.
Adoption has accelerated dramatically.
I don't think these conversations would have been had this time last year. Honestly, in a speed sense, they're quicker. We're getting quicker to these conversations. Where before it would have been conversation about adopting best practice. And it's just a slightly different thing. And I'm not saying it's not the same thing, because you probably will find it is, but in a different way. But yeah, I agree. I totally agree. There's another few questions and points we've got coming in as well, Jeff. One says, do you see rules-based IT support as a good first start, the bridge to true AI and supporting the organization just starting out on an automation solutions journey, or better skip to AI solutions? It's really interesting on that, because we myself and Jeff have been engaged in organizations looking at what they're doing, and there's a whole raft of different speeds and types of solutions that they're developing. Some of the more intelligent ones really don't need the skills to support them. They're account managed. They're supported by experts to change, create, and develop, which is really interesting. So in that case, depending on the organizations, you'd be able to skip into a SaaS or an AI as a solution service and start to integrate that with the help of the vendor. But also, I've seen organizations mainly in the MSP space, who have rushed into this. And I'm talking 3 years ago, rushed into putting an assistant in, or working towards it, and in quite a mature place. One organization where they started was to really find where their data was, to try and look at, and I think this has become, and if you ask a data scientist, the right place to start is, where is the data? Where do you live? Where is it? How do we find it? What do we do with it? And then how do we use that then to initiate some AI solutions? So I think it'll depend on the organization, the need of the organization to invest in development skills and technologies to create their own. Another example, I spoke to KPMG this week. They're developing their own bespoke solutions. I spoke with Capgemini not too long back, and they were talking about an 18-month development that had seen a more cognitive solution being created in-house. So I think it depends. I think certainly what I would say is, go out and start to investigate, look for resources, look at the community, speak to organizations who are starting on this journey if you haven't started yet. What about you, Jeff? What do you think of that?
Well, you started with a question around rules-based IT support, and most of the popular bots that you hear about, Watson and Microsoft Azure, for example, they're rules-based, and almost all the MSPs now have adopted some intelligent bot, but it's not true AI, because it is really just human intelligence. It's rules-based type stuff. But the reason MSPs are rushing into this is because there's really no source of differentiation left anymore. As in my role at MetricNet, I work with organizations that are procuring outsourced services, and I work with outsourcers that are trying to sell managed services. And everyone's looking for a way to differentiate themselves. And there hasn't been a real game changer in the MSP space for quite some time. There hasn't been a disruptor in the MSP space for quite some time. They're trying to differentiate themselves around customer experience. In some cases, they're trying to differentiate themselves that the last big disruptor, honestly, was idle, when all the MSPs adopted idle, and it's now well understood that if you're an effective MSP or a credible MSP, you're going to have mature idle processes. But the MSPs adopted some of these better known so-called AI tools as a way to differentiate themselves. Everybody has them now, but it's not true AI. It really is. For example, it's a bot that reads a knowledge article, and then it's a chat bot or a voice bot that reads a knowledge article and tells you what it's read. I think with the machine learning AI that exists now, and I now have seen credible demonstrations of AI tools that meet the definition that I provided very early on, this represents a real game changer for managed service providers, because the customers for years, even decades, have been crying out for the MSPs to do more around prevention, more around problem management, more around maturing knowledge management. And I hate to say this, David, but about 95% of all MSP contracts are out of compliance. And that's not just the fault of the managed service providers, it's also the customers who don't hold the MSPs accountable to the letter of the contract. And so what we find is a lot of these are out of compliance, and generally it's not around the service levels. The contract will state that the MSP has to meet certain service level targets. Generally, it's the proactive things that they drop the ball on. You're supposed to be maturing problem management. You're supposed to be reducing ticket volume over time. You're supposed to be reducing incident management and knowledge management. And so for the first time, MSPs have an opportunity to adopt tools that automate those things, because problem management is very labor intensive, knowledge management, very labor intensive, incident management can be very labor intensive. But if you can automate that with an AI tool, which there are AI tools now that automatically update your knowledge base, automatically engage in problem management, automatically do incident management, MSPs now have a way to differentiate themselves if, as part of their solution, they incorporate true AI powered by machine learning. They can give customers something they've been craving for a long, long time: prevention, proactivity, ticket reduction, TCO reduction, lower MTTRs, preemptive detection of major incidents. This will be a game changer for the MSPs. And what they've rushed to do so far, I think those were your words, David, is adopt sort of the brand name AI tools, which again, they're not really AI tools. They read knowledge articles and tell you what they've read. So when you think of a chat bot or a voice bot, that might be considered RPA, robotic process automation. Those tools read a knowledge article and give you a solution, but they are not truly preemptive. They don't operate at level -1, that is automated problem management, and they don't operate at level -2, which is anomaly detection and prevention by providing alerts to IT about pending hard drive failure, a trending incident that they might be able to eliminate, an application that is beginning to fail. This preemptive type thing is really, in my mind, more than anything else, detection and prevention of incidents is what, without human intervention, is one of the key differentiators of true AI versus just RPA, a chatbot or a voice bot that reads a knowledge article, for example. But for MSPs that really want to differentiate themselves and start to win market share and increase profitability, true AI tools powered by machine learning are, I think, the first game changer, the first disruptor that has come along in many years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting, Jeff, if you think about ITIL and you think about incident, problem, change, release, if you think about the relationships of those processes, the ownership, and how they're used in organizations. In some cases, one or two of those very well. In other cases, most of them quite badly. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested to see how this kind of technology really changes the proposition of incident, problem, or certainly problem. How does problem management change with this kind of technology? Do you know, it may become what it should be, because for me, and this may be, maybe controversial, humans are fallible. Humans have to, when we have to follow a process, there is inevitable mistakes. When we have to follow a process, inevitably we will miss things. And I think there's a premise here of managing the technology to be better than we are at doing certain things like that. So that's really interesting. There's another question that's come in as well, which is about predictive tools. So how does the use of more predictive tools impact the trend in some of the common mean time to resolve, first contact resolution metrics. For example, the characteristics of work changes. It absolutely does, doesn't it? Why not maturing metrics to measure total downtime or number of interruptions? And also, we need to talk and discuss about fragility, fragile, not just resilience, about fragility and how we look at that difference. I couldn't agree more. We'll come on to some of the thoughts on measurements, Jeff, after this, right? But if we talk about fragility, I mean, again, you know, I'll give you one example. There was one organization I was speaking to 18 months ago. They started to develop, as part of their digital transformation program, a bot, something to help them to pick up the chat channel. That's matured over the last 18 months. And to give you an example of how COVID-19 affected them, they went from a matter of weeks, from 18,000 end-user telephone calls a week to 47,000 calls a week, from 9,000 emails a week to 30,000 emails a week. Now, it's a big service. They've got around 400 staff working there, so it's a big service, okay? So they've been developing this virtual assistant over 18 months, aiming to develop it, to make it more cognitive, to help it to learn. And when COVID-19 hit, they were able to leverage that virtual assistant, digital labor, right? Let's call it digital labor, right? To support triage and deflection. That instance gave them total elasticity. When we talk about fragility, when we're talking about the years of driving cost out of support services, they are more brittle than ever. And we didn't know they were brittle until something like this happened. So we've got brittle services now with no plasticity. This kind of stuff really helps to change that, really does. So that plasticity, that elasticity, it saw the virtual agent interaction shift from 8,000 chats to 70,000 chats a week. 70,000 chats a week from 8,000. And during that time, they maintained their service levels for customer satisfaction, for mean time to resolve, for first contact resolution as well. So they had done their homework. They'd spent 18 months not to prepare for what happened. It was more of a coincidence, but they had something there. So when we talk about fragility, Jeff, I don't know what you think about that, but I think that's an absolutely key thing we talk about when we talk about the old and the new. What do you think?
Yeah. So the start of the question was around predictive tools, and I think how do those predictive tools impact MTTR? The predictive and preemptive and proactive components of AI do not necessarily affect MTTR, and we're going to get into a discussion of metrics shortly here. But prediction and prevention eliminates problems altogether. So ideally, there's no MTTR associated with it. The way you get the reduced MTTR through AI in service and support is by getting the ticket to the right person at the right time. In other words, if it can be resolved at level 1, get it to level 1 and get it resolved on first contact. If it has to go to desktop support or field services, who's your subject matter expert on that particular ticket? Where's your center of excellence on that particular ticket? Get it to that, SME or that COE as quickly as you can. Likewise for vendor support, likewise for level 3 IT. So avoiding ticket hops, a ticket going to the wrong place or bouncing back and forth, so-called ticket ping pong, is a key part of reducing the MTTR that AI brings to the table. So when you're operating preemptively and proactively, you don't see a reduction in MTTR because you eliminate the ticket altogether. But the way the MTTR reduction happens is by eliminating unnecessary escalations, ticket hops, ticket ping pongs, for example, getting the right ticket to the right person at the right time. It takes into account subject matter expertise, where your centers of excellence are. And also, if you're a global organization, it identifies who's available at any particular time of the day or night. You don't want to be sending a ticket to India at 3 o'clock in the morning, for example, that sort of thing. Now, as it relates to fragility, we've always known that IT service and support operates near the edge of failure. Every IT support organization operates that way. They tend to be under-resourced with human resources, with technology. They tend to be underfunded because they are viewed as cost centers. A cost center is simply a cost of doing business, and it's not viewed as something that adds economic value to the organization. So they all operate near the point of failure. So fragility is quite high. And to your point, David, a lot of support organizations discovered that when COVID hit, is that they just had no resilience. They had no plasticity, if you will. They just weren't able to adapt quickly, because when you are so labor-based, any perturbation, an increase in volume, an increase in the different, VPN type calls went through the roof when people started working from home. Connectivity calls shot through the roof when people started working from home. So there was a new class of problem. There was a dramatic increase in the incidents and service requests that were coming into service and support. So these systems are enormously fragile, and they're not very elastic. AI is neither fragile, it is not fragile in the least. It's a machine. It can, and the Erlang distribution doesn't affect AI. AI is fine whether or not your workload is constant and predictable, like an assembly line, which IT service and support is not. Or and it's fine if you want to throw a spiky Erlang distribution at it. Part of the reason IT service and support, human-powered IT service and support is so inefficient is because of the Erlang nature of the rate at which tickets and problems come into an organization. You are forever either understaffed or overstaffed because you can't staff for the peak and you can't staff for the valley. So it's a frustrating environment to work in. Machines don't care about that. It doesn't care how spiky the distribution is. If you've got a tool that can that with the capacity to handle the volume, it doesn't matter if it's taking 10 calls a second or 10 calls an hour. It doesn't matter if it's 9 o'clock on a Monday morning or 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It doesn't really care. And so there's a lot of resilience, a lack of fragility, if you will, a lot of resilience and plasticity in these AI tools. Human-based IT service and support will always operate near the point of failure. There's very little elasticity, lots and lots of fragility. And we learned that. So many IT service and support organizations broke, so to speak, when the pandemic hit. And some of them are still struggling to get back on their feet. Others adapted more quickly, but there are a lot out there that are still struggling to get back on their feet due to the fragility, due to the fact that so many support organizations operate near the edge of failure.
I couldn't agree more. We had a question earlier about the types of solutions out there, and I think investigating the vendor market over the last year or so, probably almost 3 years. It's a minefield, right? And certainly, when you look at IT traditional vendors and you look at new startup vendors, it's a tricky place to navigate, I think it's fair to say. I was speaking with, and we've spoke with Sam as well, Sam Gross, who's the founder of an organization called ChoiceWorks. And ChoiceWorks provide AI as a service solution. So it's digital labor solutions for automation, RPA management, proactive endpoint remediation, which is a key part of this, if you look at the remediation. And they're all sort of designed to simplify intelligent automation and developing the digital workplace. And they've got a really cool proposition called Actinium. And that supports proactive remediation. It's endpoint management. If you take event management and you sort of give it a lot of steroids, it's that, right? It's proactive remediation and endpoint management. So it's fixing stuff before they break. It's a virtual assistant as well. It actually provides a conversational platform that you can exchange with, will actually try to initiate fixes, which is, I think, brilliant. It actually tries to fix. So there's a whole host of, and if I remember, it's about the best part of 50 or 60 things that are boxed that it will try and fix itself in real time. So instead of a service desk analyst taking 6 minutes to take the data, listen, diagnose, put a fix, this thing does it in seconds, 6 seconds, because it's all that's built into the tool. It's got a reasoning engine in as well, and it's got multiple points of data from multiple customers to learn from. It's spectacular, and I don't know if that leads on to that question you mentioned it earlier. Really, what other vendors have you seen then when we're talking about this type of stuff, Jeff? What other vendors have you seen when we're talking about shift left, search and destroy? Because for me, probably when we move from the knowledge, the thing that gives you knowledge, right, so the self-service, the bot, to this kind of technology, this is probably one of the better ones I've seen. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of people are familiar with some of the common so-called bots out there. The best known are probably Core AI, Microsoft Azure, and IBM's Watson. They're really RPA, they're rules-based, they're human intelligence. They do some things well. They're good at reading knowledge articles and then giving you an answer as a chatbot or as a voice bot. Those are the best known so-called AI tools, but they're really not AI. What you mentioned about ChoiceWorks and their tool, Actinium, that is AI. I worked with Sam Gross when I was at Gartner many years ago, and I know Frank. He's a personal friend of mine. And ChoiceWorks, Aptinium in particular, endpoint management, that is looking at servers, looking at hard drives, looking at devices, and recognizing when something is not going well. It might be a pending hard drive failure, it might be a pending server failure, and then an alert is sent out so that IT can take that device offline or perhaps repair and replace it. So that's one type of AI in the IT service and support environment, endpoint management, where you try and prevent these types of failures. It's a very hardware-focused type of AI. Another company, and full disclosure, I'm the general manager. In addition to running MetricNet, being the managing partner of MetricNet, I also do work for a company called Deep Coding. I'm actually their North American general manager. So this is not meant to be a sales pitch, but Deep Coding doesn't do that kind of AI. It's not endpoint management. It's not looking at endpoints looking for failures. What it does instead is it extracts all of the data out of your existing systems. It might be telephony systems like Avaya, Cisco, Genesys, and Nuance, your ITSM system, whether it's ServiceNow, Remedy, Sharewell, Zendesk, or any other. Extracting data from your knowledge base if you have a separate knowledge base, and also from your remote control tool if you have, for example, Bongar or LogMe. And it takes that data, historical data, and it learns from it. It finds cause and effect relationships that are not apparent even to somebody like me who's been in the industry for 30 years. I've been amazed at how Deep Coding will find connections that will find cause and effect relationships that I didn't think about, that I didn't know existed. So Aptinium is sort of an endpoint management tool, whereas Deep Coding is a tool that learns from past data, and then once it's deployed in real time, it operates in a predictive capacity. It will route tickets intelligently, getting them to your SMEs, your subject matter experts, and your COEs without unnecessary ticket hops. It gets you to quicker FCR and FLR by improving knowledge automatically. It preempts tickets, eliminates them through automated problem management. It also operates at level -2, looking for anomalies. And when it detects an anomaly, it will provide an alert to IT so that IT can take measures to prevent what is an anomaly from becoming a multitude of tickets that are opened by hundreds of users. If you can eliminate a few MIs, major incidents per year, you potentially save your end users, hundreds of thousands of hours of productive time. So Deep Coding is a very different tool than Aptinium. Aptinium, as you mentioned, is endpoint management, looking for pending failures in the endpoints, the printers, the servers, the hard drives, et cetera. Whereas Deep Coding is a tool, machine learning tool that uses data to learn, that is past data to learn, come up to speed, and use that to operate preemptively, proactively, and strategically going forward. And it gets smarter over time. It learns from itself, much like Deep Blue did when it learned how to play chess, taught itself how to play chess, and eventually got good enough to beat the world's best chess player. So the demos, this is why I became convinced earlier this year, David, that we are at an inflection point. I saw the demo of Aptinium, and I was impressed by that. I saw the demo of Deep Coding, and I thought, okay, this is the real deal. This is something that the industry has been waiting for at least a couple of decades, and it's finally here. And not only that, the industry is ready for it. The front line, it no longer fears AI. So those are, without sounding like an advertisement for either Aptinium, ChoiceWorks, or for Deep Coding, those are two of the tools that I see in the environment that are the real deal, that do reduce your total cost of ownership, that do operate preemptively and proactively at level -1 and level -2, that do reduce your MTTRs, your total cost of ownership, and at the same time, improve the customer experience. That's a lot to ask of a single tool, but these tools do that. And that's why I believe, until 2020, I thought, AI is a little bit of an illusion because it really was human intelligence by and large. But in 2020, for the first time, and I think accelerated by the pandemic, we are seeing these tools on the scene now that are operating preemptively, proactively, reducing total cost of ownership, reducing ticket volumes, and leading to better, faster, cheaper customer experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I knew we were going to. I knew this was going to happen. We've got 10 minutes left, and we were nowhere near what we'd hoped we'd get through. There's a person has asked about the name of the company to describe Aptinium. It's if you put in ChoiceWorks, which is WORX, ChoiceWorks Aptinium with a double P, you'll find it. And I think we have an obligation to talk about these tools, Jeff, to bring them to the attention. For me, the worst case scenario is as a non-independent thing of the vendor community, that things like Watson and things like Watson are taken as the only solution. I think people really need to understand that the vendor market is complex, right? So I tell you what, I think we've got 10 minutes left. Let's talk about maybe some of the traditional metrics and what you think are going to change in the way that we measure service, okay? So if you look at the traditional stuff, occupancy, utilization, first contact resolution, average time to resolve, customer satisfaction, all that wonderful stuff. What do you think to see? And maybe let's consider as well total cost of ownership in all this, Jeff. So we know there's a cost of employing these new things. We know there's a cost to doing all that and to run it and to learn. How does that stack up, do you think, the total cost of ownership to a solely human-based service and a blended service as well? So what do you think of that? What types of things will come to the fore as key metrics to measure?
Yeah, there are, for people may be shocked to know that there are no new metrics around AI, but there are metrics that are more important when you're measuring the effectiveness of AI. For example, if you look at tickets per user per month, at level 1, the number is about 1.1 worldwide. So across a lot of different vertical markets and geographies, 1.1 ticket per user per month at level 1. At desktop support, the number is about 0.5 tickets. So that's about 1.6 tickets for level 1 and desktop support per user per month across all industries, across all geographies. Okay, that number should go down with an effective AI tool. We've seen it get as low as 0.4 or 0.5 tickets per user per month, combined level 1 and desktop support and field services. So tickets per user per month, it's not a real common metric in a traditional labor-intensive environment, but in an AI environment is critically important because of an effective AI tool powered by machine learning should reduce your ticket volume and specifically your tickets per user per month. Second metric, MTTR, it's been a metric that's been around for a long, long time. Effective AI reduces that MTTR largely because, as I said, tickets get routed more efficiently. They go to the right person at the right place at the right time. So instead of ticket hops and tickets sitting in queue for a while, for example, a ticket comes in through a SPOC, single point of contact service desk, it gets escalated to some level 3 IT guy that doesn't look at it for 2 days. That happens a lot, unfortunately. An effective AI tool is going to get a ticket to the right person at the right place at the right time, thereby dramatically reducing the MTTR. How do first contact and first level resolution improve? Well, largely through automated improvements in knowledge. If your knowledge gets better, the agents have a better ability to increase their first contact and first level resolution rate. So indirectly, FCR and FLR is improved through automated knowledge management. Your TCO should go down. Shift left, that's what shift left is all about, is reducing your TCO. So if you move a ticket from level 2 support or vendor support to level 1 support, that reduces your total cost of ownership. So that the metrics of AI already exist, but what you should see is a trend in your tickets per user per month going down, MTTR going down, FCR and FLR going up, TCO, total cost of ownership, going down. All of those things should happen, and the customer experience should improve. You might measure that through customer satisfaction or net promoter score or customer effort score or some combination of those 3 things, but it needs to also produce a better customer experience. It's not good enough just to reduce your ticket volume and your cost. You also have to improve the quality of the customer experience. So the big metrics, David, are going to be your tickets per user per month. That's your primary ticket volume measure. Your mean time to resolve, which does have a significant impact on customer satisfaction, first contact and first level resolution rate, total cost of ownership. Those are the metrics to watch when it comes to AI, and an effective deployment will move the needle on all of those metrics, and will move it fairly substantially, fairly dramatically. Final metric would be ROI. The ROI of AI is based on your reduction in TCO, that's your R numerator. How much are you reducing your TCO? And then the denominator is the cost of the tool itself. Now, an effective AI tool is going to have an ROI well in excess of 1,000%, meaning that it produces a return 10x or more what the annual cost is. So I just put together an ROI calculation for a client yesterday, and we found that the projected ROI based on the reduction in total cost of ownership, which again is numerator, return total cost of ownership over some period of time, denominator, annual operating expense, and it was about 1,800%, meaning that the tool is returning about 18x what the annual cost of the tool is. So those are the metrics that I would be thinking about in an AI deployment. And effective AI will move the needle in the right direction on every one of those metrics.
Yeah, interesting. I think I've also seen as well being touted around, Jeff, obviously our old friend deflection, right? So deflection into this kind of technology and the technology using it to deflect into other. So that I think that'll be, I think that will come back into I suppose if you look at the relationship between self-help and first-line support, breaking up that adoption thing, which I think we've always struggled with in services, the adoption of self-support, enabling the more self-sufficient end user. I've also seen a few things around the percentage of correctly routed interactions by the use of this technology, and things like the percentage of incidents that are resolved by this kind of incident. So it's almost as you said, it doesn't really change massively, but it changes the perspective of who did it. Was it human? Was it the technology? And if it's a technology that isn't hitting the KPIs, the return that we need, how do we change that so it's doing more? And also things like remediation as well. We talked about that, isn't it? So how remediated, how much percentage of interactions are remediated, which is a bit tougher, I think, to measure, I think, as well. And also I've seen, which is quite interesting, the right percentage of workload being managed by a human and AI. So that mix is more, more intelligent as well. So I'm really interested, Jeff. I think it's people like our communities, our practitioners, our vendors, which will help to shape some of these newer take on maybe the older ways of measuring stuff as well. Mm-hmm. We are not far off time. We've got not far off time. I'm going to read maybe one out if I can squeeze this in. So we've had a couple of people saying that it's a really great insights. Thank you for your feedback, everybody. If this is the type of stuff you really want to see, all you've got to do is let Jeff, myself, Angela know, and certainly we will try and provide more. This one says, shouldn't shift left be more about increasing value of the services to customer, not just reducing the cost? Do you know, honestly, in the premise of being a customer, absolutely, but it depends who the customer is and depends their position in the organization. I think for me, as in, are they the direct customer that you're driving the cost down for anyway? So the service is directly impacting on the customer as the buying customer organization, or indeed from an MSP perspective as well. I think it's fair to say we see more about the reduction in cost in service than what it means for the customer. It's more, although they may be indirectly or directly linked, I think it's fair to say. And one last point before you come back in on that, Jeff, if I may. Many of the metrics discussed are heavily based versus customer experience. How will AI, ML impact customer experience with a service provider? That's a really good question. What do you think about those points there, Jeff?
So shift left shouldn't be an either or. Either you get cost reduction or you get quality improvement, better customer experience. It shouldn't be an either or. And you can't force shift left. For example, if you're trying to shift from vendor support to level 3 IT or from desktop support to level 1, it doesn't work unless you have the capability at that level that you're shifting left to. So you can't force a shift left. You're doing it because you have the capability to resolve a ticket at level 1 at a lower cost than at desktop support or field services. The dominant driver tends to be economics. Yeah, shift left is driven by the need and the desire to reduce total cost of ownership as much as possible. But if organizations did so at the expense of the customer experience, I don't think shift left would be very popular. Ideally, you can have your cake and eat it too. If I'm a user and I go in through the front end SPOC at a service desk, I want resolution right there. And if I'm routed properly, I will get resolution right there. I'm not going to be happy if that ticket bounces to desktop support and then goes to field services and then goes to vendor support, because every time that ticket transfers to a different level of support, it adds time to that ticket. And so effective routing gets the ticket to the right person at the right place at the right time. And if you're shifting left, of course, there's an economic driver there, but it's not meant to be at the expense of the customer experience. In fact, it should improve the customer experience, because the ticket goes to the person that has the best ability to resolve that ticket at that particular point in time. That's where your MTTR reduction comes from. So if my ticket really belongs in field services and not at level 1, or it belongs at Cisco or some other vendor and not at desktop support, I'm a happy customer if that ticket goes directly to the person that is most qualified to resolve it at that particular point in time. That's how you get the MTTR reduction. So MTTR reduction leads to a better customer experience, whether you're measuring customer effort, customer satisfaction, or net promoter score. So don't think of shift left as either an economic benefit at the sacrifice of a customer experience. It's not meant to be that. Effective shift left moves the needle on both of those. It reduces the total cost of ownership, and it improves the customer experience because it eliminates unnecessary ticket hops.
It should be. And I've seen organizations, right, who don't think like that. And I wish more organizations would. When I see organizations who are driving costs out because they need to, not really considering what that means from a value perspective of the customer. And we've all seen very poorly built services that have ended up like that. I always look at shift left in a simple way. If I go into a restaurant and I'm trying to create a better service for my customers, a really good analogy there is the sort of the way in which you skill an unskilled person to flambe at the table. You bring the service right in front of the customer, and the experience is better for it. That's how I always look at shift left. So I'm not picking up an order, going to the chef is making it, I'm delivering the order. I've been trained to flambe so I can flambe for the customer. Now that to me is shift left.
Yeah.
And on that note, Jeff, we are 1 minute over.
Yeah. Always an honor and a pleasure, David. And to our audience out there, although I can't see you, you're the ones that motivate me every day in this industry. And I hope you found this session to be informative and insightful. As you go through your careers, as you know, you're deluged with information. And what I hope is that you can look back on this session with me and David Wright and say, I really learned something there, and it actually helped me in my career. That's my hope out of today's session. Thank you so much. I'm honored and very humbled to be here today with David and with all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And I'd like to echo that as well. I think to be honest, I think the more open, transparent the conversations are around this, and I'll be as I said at the beginning before we just, I'm not an expert in AI, nowhere near, but I will need what I need to become to be able to explain it properly and share the stories that I see with other organizations as well. So I'm hoping in the same way that the people who have listened have learned some stuff, and we'll do this again soon, I think.
Look forward to it, David. Always a pleasure to be with you, and always a pleasure to try and share what little I know about this industry with those that dial in for these webcasts. So thank you once again to the audience. And David, thank you for being such a gracious host.
It's been really good. And you're absolutely right, Jeff. I think the practitioners know sometimes almost 100% more than the commentators. Even the ex-practitioners, they know more than us. So that's all. I always live by that. But anyway, we're going into different territory there. We'll end up then, Jeff. I'm going to end that now. Look, thank you for listeners. Thank you, Jeff, again. And we'll see you very, very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Good.
Bye now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.